It's a commonly known fact that since the release of F1 22, the game series has taken a hit in its player base over the past year. The dip in players can be linked to numerous events that have taken place since the F1 22 game has been out, but it can also be heavily linked to the bugs that were present at the launch of the game, as well as the botched launch of the early access that was meant to happen for the Champions Edition of the game. While a lot of these things were in the control of Codemasters, there was a lot of other external factors that had an impact on the game over the course of its release. Some of these factors include that the lockdowns aren't affecting as many people around the globe as they did in 2020 and 2021. This allows people to enjoy activities outside they were unable to the previous 2 years, such as going to the Grand Prix themselves. But that brings us to the point of the Real World Championship for this year, which is actually beginning to have a drop off ever since the championship is pretty much wrapped up, concluding well before the season is finished. There is no title fight this year as there was last year between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. Looking at the Google Trends graph for F1 2021 and F1 2022 in the real world, the F1 2021 game got to enjoy the hype at the end of the 2021 season, as well as the hype at the start of the 2022 season, where the championship battle was very much still on at that point. But ever since the 2021 game has been released, there's only ever been a plateau or a drop off in attention for Formula 1. So when you combine this with people spending less time at home and less time playing games, it unfortunately creates the perfect storm for Codemasters to lose a portion of their player base. But something is different this year in particular, and that is the introduction of competition. There are a lot of likely candidates to be thought of as competitors to the F1 22 game. But surprisingly, I'm going to ask the question, did F1 Manager actually kill the F1 22 player base? Now, some people might believe that F1 Manager is not a direct competitor to the F1 22 game, but given that they are both F1 games and F1 Manager was released not long after F1 22, it has definitely split the player base to some degree that would usually spend their time on F1 22 to spend time on F1 Manager. And this is also shown with the YouTubers that usually play Formula 1 22 also jumping on board with F1 Manager. Both games are completely different in the way that one game allows you to enjoy driving the car and the racecraft involved with it, whereas Manager is just completely related to the management side of Formula 1. But F1 Manager had the potential to steal some players from the F1 22 player base, as it was able to capitalize on mostly positive feedback received by the game when it was launched, whereas F1 22 was receiving a lot of criticism at the time. We must also realize that F1 Manager is more accessible to the casual player, as you only need a keyboard and mouse or a controller to play it, and the specifications for playing the game is in general a lot lower than what F1 22 requires. If you wanted an ideal experience with F1 22, it would be recommended to get a steering wheel or at least a controller, whereas that is not necessarily needed at all for F1 Manager. So it's clear to see that F1 Manager has a lot more accessibility and the cost barrier is a lot lower to enjoy the game than F1 22. And that's where F1 Manager could potentially capitalize on poaching some players from the player base of F1 22. Or so I would expect. Even after discussing all of these things, it's actually had a reverse effect on F1 22 than what was expected. Even before F1 Manager was released, F1 22 didn't hit the same targets that F1 2021 did when it launched. As you can see, the difference between last year's game and this year's game on the launch month is over 1,000 players less on average, which is astoundingly low, and we must also take into account that Origin has also joined as a platform for PC, but I guarantee you that majority of players would have stuck with Steam. If they've made a purchase with Steam before, they probably purchased several games with Steam before, and also it's a much more popular platform. And the addition of Origin as a platform definitely wouldn't account for over 1,000 players on average difference playing on Origin instead of Steam this year. The largest impact it would have is on the peak player stat overall. But the most interesting thing is when you would expect F1 Manager to do damage to F1 22's popularity, is it actually increased the players temporarily when F1 Manager was launched on the F1 22 game. You can clearly see there's a boost in players in August, so it actually had the opposite effect. But where it gets scary for F1 22 is that for September of this year, it is actually only reaching 11,000 peak players in comparison to the peak player base of 23,000 for last year's game. That is a massive difference, and when you look at the average players, it's 4,100 average players compared to the 7,400 players of last year. Those numbers are awfully close to 50% less players at this point in time, and this is where things might start to get serious for the F1 22 game, because as we discussed, F1 Manager actually helped upon its launch for the F1 22 game's player base, but they are both F1 licensed games, so that means when FOM takes a look at this brand new game who's had only the development of one game so far to reflect upon, and the feedback they are receiving are mostly positive ratings versus the very mixed opinions and very mixed ratings of F1 22, it could definitely open a can of worms for who FOM decides to give their licensing to for the game studio to develop their game. This is very unfortunate because there's no one more than myself that wants F1 22 to perform well and Codemasters to develop the best game that they possibly can. But the numbers of the player base are dwindling already, and a lot of F1 YouTubers are spending more time on the F1 Manager game and also not receiving as many views as they did making videos on the F1 2021 game when it was near the end of its life cycle. And it's also creating a difficult situation for F1 YouTubers as well, as the novelty of F1 Manager is starting to decline. Just like any other game, it's totally natural. But when these YouTubers attempt to start making content on the F1 22 game again, the popularity of those videos are tanking a lot harder than what they should be at this point in the year. And the people that I'm using as reference, such as Yano or Tima Marduk, they still produce the same great content that they usually do, and there's no difference in the quality of their content. It's just the popularity of the topic becoming less and less over time. So with FOM licensing being brought into question, and also the fact that F1 Manager also took a lot of attention away from the F1 22 game, leaving it to underperform even more, it definitely leaves F1 Manager as a threat to F1 22, even though they are totally different games. So how does the F1 Manager player base stack up against F1 22 currently? Well, actually, the all-time peaks are very similar, and also the 24-hour peaks are very similar as well. The only notable difference is that F1 Manager in its day-to-day life cycle seems to have higher lows than the F1 22 game. And because of this, it means that the F1 Manager average player base from day to day is currently higher than F1 22. So how did F1 Manager come out of the box so well compared to F1 22, who's had several years since 2009 or 2010, if you want to consider their first serious entry into the F1 series? How has F1 Manager done it on their first game? Well, F1 Manager was developed by Frontier Developments, which is also based in the UK alongside Codemasters. The major difference between developing these two games is that Frontier decided to go with Unreal Engine 4, which is the same platform that many other huge games have been developed on, such as Fortnite, Valorant, Rocket League, Gears of War, just to name a few, Borderlands as well. There is so many good games that have been developed on Unreal Engine 4. So for Frontier Developments to select Unreal Engine 4 as their platform to create F1 Manager is definitely not a bad idea. Now we compare this to Codemasters' F1 22 game engine, which is Ego, and it's been used since the F1 2015 game, so it's pretty dated now. Unreal Engine 4 is also dated, but receives a whole bunch more attention because it's such a large platform. Whereas Codemasters developed the Ego engine in-house, so therefore anything that gets changed about the Ego engine has to come from Codemasters directly themselves. And it is really time for Codemasters to update to a new engine, whether it means updating to a newer game engine themselves that they've developed and created in-house, or shifting over to a new game engine that is created by another developer. It doesn't matter either way, but to unlock all the new potential of the new graphics cards and the new consoles that are being released, such as PS5, they really needed to have a new game engine to extract all the performance that was on offer. Not to mention that the code is also very lazy. There's still Toro Rosso files all the way back from 2015. They really need to update their code. There's very limited mod support for the Ego engine in general. And you look at that as missed opportunity, as Assetto Corsa has heaps and heaps of modification potential, and that's just, it's increased the longevity of the game. There's a lot more players playing Assetto Corsa right now because of all those mods, and there's simply not that opportunity as much. It's very limited on the F1 22 game with the Ego engine. The complacency of staying with an older game engine is really starting to show the consequences this year with the drop in player base for F1 22. If Codemasters want to turn this around, they need to start listening to the player base they have and include quality content that people want to play. They are now under pressure from F1 Manager, but some things that I would say that need to be changed, easier said than done, is to update to a newer game engine. They need to improve mod support for the game because that improves the longevity of the game by so much. Just look at other games such as Assetto Corsa, Minecraft, and all the others that have so many mods on them that just enable the creativity of the community to get involved. I really hope Codemasters succeed with next year's game, or else they might be put under even more pressure and scrutiny by the F1 community. They've made some great games in the past, such as F1 2010, 2012, 2013, 2017 was good. They've made a bunch of good games. Now's the time to listen to the players, see what they want, but Codemasters also has to deal with the direction that EA wants to take the game, and who knows what direction that will take us in. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and make sure you comment any opinions that you have in the comment section below. Hopefully EA and Codemasters see what your opinions are and what the player wants for next year's game, and hopefully we can see those changes being made. Thanks for watching.